Okay, here we are. Welcome to ZEIT Heist on Shady Pines Radio. I'm Josh Gaines, and I'm sitting here with Igor Brezhnev?
Bjorn Brezhnev.
Bjorn Brezhnev. Okay. Yes, that's right. You recently changed it, or that is up and coming?
It is
or pending?
It's a pending process. I am kind of shedding the old skin and growing a new one. Yes. I don't know how long it's going to take.
Yes, right. Those legal processes are silly. It seems like it should be so simple and just like quick, done. But anyhow, one day it will be final, and you will be the new version.
Yeah, Igor 2.0.
Yes, yes. Well, let's touch on what is happening. So as we're recording this, it's Thursday, January 19th, and on the 24th, you have an event happening. And what is that?
Well, so on January 24th, 7 to 9, doors at 6:30, we are hosting the first quarterly poetry showcase at Coho Theater, Word Lights Poetry Showcase. And we're featuring 3 Lightship Press poets, Red O'Hare, Sam Rose Preminger, and Christopher Luna. So these poets, we just recently published their books, and so we're celebrating the release of those books. That was our efforts last year to get those books funded and published, and so we're celebrating that with our feature poets, and we're evolving the format that we used to have before with Word Lights, because Word Lights has been around for a few years.
Okay.
We have started it at the Rocking Frog Cafe in 2019, and hosted, I think, over 50 shows every week, providing a stage for both local and traveling talent. We've had a poet from as far as Singapore.
Goodness. Cool.
Come and grace our stage at the Rocking Frog. We've had quite a number of really amazing local poets. One of them, Anis Mashgani, our Oregon Poet Laureate, Mike McGee. So many amazing names. So much amazing poetry went on at Rocking Frog. And so when the pandemic started, we actually had a radio show on Shady Pines Radio at the very beginning of Shady Pines Radio.
Yes.
And I think we've recorded maybe 2 months worth of shows, and then it was just too much work. So
Sure.
I applaud you for doing what you do.
It is a lot of work. Yes.
How much work that is.
Yes, to keep up a weekly rhythm is it comes fast. Friday comes fast every week. Yes.
Yeah, and then pandemic happened, so that was pretty rough on everyone.
Yes.
And we couldn't have shows for a long time, and when last year started, 2022, I started to bring back the show little by little, and so we've had maybe 10, 12 shows total at different venues around Portland. Mm-hmm. Belmont Books, Wallflower Coffee, Honey Latte Cafe, and we've had a couple of shows at the Coho Theater, where this next showcase is going to be. And our format usually has been a feature poet and an open mic.
Yeah.
But one thing that I've noticed after hosting an open mic for a few years is that it's very ephemeral. We show up, we put a lot of energy into creating a show, and then it dissipates like it's never happened. I mean, we have our memories. There's a little bit of impact for the feature poets. Maybe they've sold some books, met some people. But for the open mic readers, it is very ephemeral. They just get up there, they read their poem, and they're celebrated in the moment, but then they go home like
Sure.
It's never happened.
Yes.
And in the world of poetry, shows are not necessarily an item that you could put on your resume.
Right.
If you are doing that as a craft, as a profession. So this year, I thought what we would do is put on a big show. put on a theater show, create a theater stage for poetry. And we've partnered up with Goho Productions, and they're amazing people there, a local nonprofit, and they're supporting a lot of interesting theater and clown projects and musicians, all sorts of variety of art. And it's the theater is in Northwest. It was established by a wonderful artist. Why am I blanking on the name? I think Paolo Cuomo.
Okay.
But Phil Johnson is a theater director there now, and they have a wonderful team of people that are very supportive.
Yeah, excellent.
Yeah.
What do you hope for this event, both for people coming to experience and see it, and what do you hope for the poets performing?
Well, so one thing about poetry, and it's really interesting because unless you're living in the world of poetry, you don't. A lot of people, a lot of general public has this idea that poetry is that 18th century textbook stuff that they read in school.
Yeah. Walt Whitman, Robert Frost.
Yeah, and Whitman is probably slightly better than some of the things, but it's somewhat dated. Current poetry is an amalgamation. There's so many different shapes and forms to it. There is, it exists somewhere. It's spoken word. It's storytelling, and so it is much more interesting and evoking. And especially hearing it live because the emotion is put back into the page.
Yes.
So the feature poets that we present, a lot of them are very experienced performers. So it is a very different experience to experience poetry performed. You get to share this emotion with multiple people.
Yes, powerful.
So it's a very powerful experience. So I'm hoping that people will come out and experience poetry, hear the poetry come alive, and rediscover poetry for themselves.
Yes.
And so the show has two segments. We present the features in the first segment, and then we've evolved our open mic into a curated mic. So these are members of the community, of poetry community, that submit their poems ahead of time, and we curate the selection, and then have our features rate the poems, and so the top poem gets a broadside prize, and then during the performance, the other 7 performers will be rated by the features and the audience for their performance, and we'll have another broadside prize as the best performed poem.
Yeah. Would you describe what a broadside is to people who might not know?
So broadside is it's publishing of poetry that has deep roots. I think some of the first poetry didn't come out in books, but it just came out as leaves.
Ah, yes.
It's basically an illuminated, illustrated poem or a part of the poem, and it serves as kind of a combination of visual and written art. So people put it on their table, people put it on their wall, and it's a way to connect with a poem visually. And so there's an old, deep tradition of producing broadsides. It's the first. You may not have a book, but you have a broadside. You have a broadside of your poem. You may have written one poem in your life, and it's a really good poem. It's like a single.
Yeah. Yes, that makes sense. That's a good way to put it.
Yeah.
How does a poet ever what I should ask it this way. What is the best way for lovers of art, lovers of poetry, lovers of literature and writing, the people who are consuming and enjoying this material, what is the best way for them to support local poets that they love?
I have said this on the mic for, years now. Every time that I'm hosting a show, I come out and I tell people that you need to support living artists because the dead ones don't need it. They're dead. They can't eat. The one of the best ways to support living poets, just hand them money. Find your poet, hand them money. If you would like an exchange, buy their book, share their work. We share music often enough. A lot of these poets also have spoken word albums. play it on your playlist, play it for your friends, share both the art, and don't forget that an artist is a living creature that needs to eat, needs to have a place to stay.
Yes.
And much like any artist, really, it takes a lot of energy to create things and be in that frame of work, to create something on that exist in the liminal spaces. So if you've got the means, just throw some money at poets. Find out if they have a Patreon. Find out if they have a Venmo, and just send them money. Be patrons of the arts.
Sure. Yes.
I mean, it's funny because most of my patrons are artists themselves.
Yeah.
They're musicians, they're visual artists, they're people that know how it feels to create art. And so they have been my supporters for years now.
Mm-hmm.
I have a Patreon myself, and so it is one of my primary means of income.
Yes.
And it makes a difference. There is this whole maxim of the starving artist. And I've spent most of my life trying to say that is unnecessary. You can create art from internal conflict, not external conflict. You can create art from curiosity.
Yes.
And a place of comfort. That this idea that somehow we need to be traumatized, starving, in order to create art, that is false, and that is an idea that's been pressed upon us by the capitalist system that we live in. That really art is an exploration. We are reaching for a boundary and seeing what that boundary is like, and sometimes crossing it, and it takes unhinging your brain a little bit.
Yes.
So you got to be a little mad, a little insane, and that does not allow you to exist within the capitalist system as easily. So if people enjoy great lyrics, good poetry, amazing visual art, my suggestion has always been find out if these folks need food.
Yes.
Find out if they have a space to live in. Give them some money. Ask them what's the best way to support you right now.
Right. Goodness. Yes. That's a beautiful way to put it. Unhinging one's brain and the way that artists typically don't fit into the common way of doing things very well. And that even the system as it is set up is not all that great for anyone, really. Have you loved poetry all your life, or did it come later at some different point where you grew to appreciate it and notice it and consume it yourself?
I think for me it was, so I've met literature at a very early age. My mother was a school teacher and a very interesting woman. And so she had it in her mind that I have to learn how to read. And I've learned to read very early because there would be things like, you can't go to the river unless you read this book. And so initially for me, it was a way to just like, all right, let me get this done. And then I'll go enjoy running around as a kid. But then I found out that in our household, it was not a great household. Let's put it this way.
Okay.
Fairly, weirdly emotionally and psychologically abusive. But one thing that both of my parents shared, even though they were not, all that amazing, if you were reading a book that was in our household, it was considered doing something, so you were left alone.
Yes.
And so at an early age, I discovered that you can go to a library and be left alone. And not experience the trauma that the world pushes on you. And two, you could be, in my case, at home and read a book and no one will bother you.
Yes.
And so I have read a lot. And then as I was coming into, early preteen, teenage years, I've discovered theater, and I've discovered also the Russian tradition of poetry. So I grew up in Soviet Union. Between Moscow and a small town in Ukraine. And I found the poetry by the Russian Silver Age poets, which is early 1900s, 1920s, probably I would say into 1930s. And there's an incredible. These are incredible people. They were part of the revolution. They were people that were examining the world from all points of view. Some of them got killed for their poetry, like Osip Mandelstam wrote a poem about Stalin, and got executed. Got sent into the labor camps and never came out.
Oh my God.
Anna Akhmatova, Marina Tsvetaeva, all of these amazing people, and they were young. Mayakovsky, when he was participating in the revolution and writing poetry and exploring a completely new style of poetry, he was 16, 13, something like that. I think he got into prison when he was like 16.
Oh my God.
So when you put that in context, that these great, amazing people were that young, and they were sharing their art with the world, and they were active, and Mayakovsky would wear a yellow shirt and jump on a table at some restaurant, in the picture, it's Russian Empire, traditionalist,
yes,
church-going folks.
Very uptight, very conservative, yes.
And there's this guy in a yellow shirt that jumps on a table at a restaurant and starts yelling out poetry that's surreal in nature, and accusative of the ruling class. And so you will have, and this is a kid, this is what punks are.
Yeah. Yes. I love that wherewithal to do that. My God.
So that's how I got into poetry. I started reading it, and I've enjoyed so much the fact that it is condensed emotion. Not only as a reader you get this condensed emotion that you could process emotions that you have but may not have the words for.
Yes.
In such a short amount of time. And prose is protracted. You have to spend time with it. You have to sit there. Whereas poetry can be short to the point with an emotional charge and allow you to relate your own emotional state. And it's a form of art that allows you to tell maybe your untold story through someone else's story. So, just reading and reciting poetry to other people is a therapeutic thing.
Yes.
And storytelling is always important. That's how we get. That's how we get heard. That's how we share what we see, and through that we instigate change. Because an examination of whether it's our internal world or external world, we can go and say, I want to change that.
Yes.
And then find out how.
Right. I was curious, back to when your mother would have you read books, was it particular literature that she was trying to instill you with, like books that she felt were important for a person to know?
Oh, I think when I started out, it was basically learn to read. So whatever was available,
Gotcha.
Age appropriate, which changed because my mother worked 2 shifts as a school teacher. So that changed very quickly. I would like raid our library, go to the top shelf where forbidden books are,
Yes.
and reach out for 1001 Nights, which had some spicy
some
content,
steamy passages. Yes, yes, excellent. Yes,
I think we've had on our shelves Russian translations of Georges de Sand and Guy de Maupassant. Some of the French authors. I don't know how they made it past the Soviet censorship, but they did. And some of it was for like a kid pretty whoa.
yes,
That's interesting.
That's a whole other aspect of these artists and writers being published in that country at that time. It goes through censors, and so they don't even have control over their final work in some cases.
I mean, that's true. That's true pretty much anywhere. You will have gatekeepers and censors under any system.
Okay, sure.
So in Soviet Union, it was a very ineffective censorship system.
Okay.
Because the people that were censors were not that educated, were not that great, and smart people could sneak things by them.
Gotcha.
Really easily. Well, let's say, for example, the kind of censorship that exists in the United States, if you want your message heard by many people, well, you have folks that approve it. You have gatekeepers, and it's more to protect the capitalist system. So if your work is directly challenging the livelihoods of the powers that be, you're not going to be, published by the top 5.
Sure.
Or now
yes.
top 4. You're not going to be put on major television networks and so forth. So there's another type of censorship.
Sure, certainly. Yes, that makes sense. When did you start emerging as a writer?
I think that was a really long road for me. I think I tried writing something when I was a kid. I remember I rewrote the Deeds of Hercules as my own character.
Wow.
And it was like a little notebook that I was very proud of as a kid.
What an interesting choice. I wonder, were you drawn to Hercules as a figure in particular?
I was drawn to myths and legends because that was as close. I mean, so growing up in Soviet Union, it was an atheist country. So a lot of the mystery and religion were pushed away. So folk tales were, this is the old superstitions,
sure,
right? And
yes.
But where you could find a lot of these interesting things and kind of fantasy setting was in myths and legends.
Yes.
And Soviet Union had translated and published in the country. They translated and published a lot of. I remember having books of myths and legends of Mexico, Irish. I remember folk tales of United States. So there's a lot of interesting things that were kind of like, well, we celebrate folk tales and fantasy in that way, but we're not going to publish somebody like Tolkien.
Yes. Okay. Sure.
So that was as a kid, that's what I had available, and I think I just enjoyed the kind of wide, incredible field of fantasy, of like trying to figure out, this person traveled from here to here and did this, and how would that look like on the map? I remember looking at the map of Greece, trying to figure out where Hercules was doing the things. But yeah, and I think, I think as most teenagers, I wrote some poetry and, tried to emulate people I liked.
Of course, yes.
Things like that. And then I performed in theater for a little while. We had a theater troupe that was organized around our school. And so I got to perform some poetry that I really loved, like Mayakovsky's poetry on stage.
Wow, yes.
And then I've had a long dip of not having art in my life, or somewhat. I was an immigrant. I had to survive. And so my life was filled with, shit jobs and, learning a new language.
Yes.
All of those things. And I think I came back to it after I stopped drinking. I think my primary art that emerged from when I was drinking, it was visual art. So I did a lot of that. And then after I quit drinking, I started writing a little bit more and collecting the things that I've written before and editing them. And I think, and what helped also, poetry is a poor person's art.
Sure.
Poetry does not require supplies and resources.
Yes.
As an art form, all you have to do is get a pencil and a piece of paper, and write whatever it is. I mean, and now we all have phones, so even the poorest of us will have some sort of device on which we could type things.
Yes.
So it is very accessible art form. Whereas like visual art, you'll need to find a studio, some sort of space. You'll need, supplies. Even if you're doing graffiti art, you still need spray paint.
Yes, you're right. I'm curious if immigrating here and drinking and the struggle of coming to a new country, shit jobs, learning the language, did that coincide? I mean, using alcohol to cope or to I don't know. It's just interesting, both of those components
I mean, we are all just trying to survive.
Mm.
I mean, no matter where you go, whatever weird mechanisms that people exhibit, they're trying to survive, sometimes in very unsustainable ways.
Mm.
I think for me, the things that I have seen in post-Soviet Union and watching a country collapse essentially, and dealing with great social change and influenced by sometimes not very good things like the greed, the anarcho-capitalism that existed in the early 90s and post-Soviet Union was horrible. I mean, this capitalism that we exist in is pretty horrible, but that was, people torturing people.
Yes.
Out in the open. So that's not something when you're growing up I think when you're growing up with these things, you discount them as this is just the reality. But as I move further and further away in years, I look at it and I say, well, that's trauma.
Yes.
That experience right there was traumatic, and it's no wonder that I started drinking when I did. At a young age. I think I started drinking to cope with things by age 12.
Wow. Yes.
And it took me, a decade or more to kind of go, oh, that's not good. That's not doing me any favors.
Yes. What age were you when you quit?
Oh, I would say somewhere late 20s.
Okay.
I mean, it was a process.
Sure.
Any sort of addiction that you develop, getting out of that addiction is a process, and sometimes it's replacing the negative addictions with positive addictions.
Sure.
And it's forevermore you know that you are an addict, an alcoholic, and you're just not engaging in that behavior.
Sure. Yes.
You're making a daily choice of not doing that.
Yes. And you feel that was suppressing in some way your ability to bring forth your art and your writing, or at least it emerged more once you had stopped drinking?
I think so.
Yeah.
To me, I think that drinking dulls you. And I've met a few people that are drunkards and great poets.
Sure.
But sometimes I wonder how much better would they have been had they not had the thing that drains life out of them, the poison.
Yes.
So I make my choice for me, right?
Yes. Sure.
Other people's choices are their own.
Yeah. Yeah. It's such a common story to idolize. I mean, I'll just speak for myself. There's a period of time in my mid-20s when I idolized people like Ernest Hemingway, and I would write on a typewriter, and I literally kept a bottle of whiskey in my desk and thought that I was this, genius, when I was really just kind of a drunk idiot writing trash at that period of time. And so anyhow, I don't know what it is that seems so romantic about that, or maybe just the fact that inebriated writers think that their work is excellent, and most of the time that ends up not being the case. There are exceptions. I think Hunter S. Thompson is pretty incredible, and he was intoxicated most of his waking hours. But anyhow,
it's an interesting thing. I think that the your life is affected in many ways by consumption of substances, right?
Sure.
And I think like any poison, it can be a medicine in small amounts. But also, once you have your liver not function, you die early. Well, what could have you created?
Yes. If
you were lived on. So that's a consideration. And for me, I think, art is a byproduct of life. So it is a way to relate a story. It's a way to process the story. I'm not necessarily creating art for consumption. When I'm creating art, it's its own process, and it is for understanding oneself better.
Yes.
It is to create. So when you're having internal thoughts, emotions, they're inside of you. You may have multiple voices within your mind. You may have examinations and awareness of yourself, this types of things. But it is not until you put it outside of you that you can create a relationship. By default, relationship is between two distant objects.
Yes.
They could be very close, they could be very distant, but there is some distance involved. So I think when we create art, an object outside of ourselves, with the things that used to be inside of us, we create a relationship. And in relationship now, it's a process. So you can there's understanding that's coming. There's change, because by interaction between you and your art, you will instill some change. It will change you in some way.
Yes.
So this change could be intentional. So I find that when I write, this is the primary objective for me. And then there is publishing and performing of art, sharing it with people. And at that point, you have to question how useful your art is to someone with whom you share.
Yes.
What are they going to get out of it? How is it going to help them? And that's a hard question.
Absolutely.
And you won't know until you share.
Right.
You won't know what your art does until you put it out there and say, look at it.
Yes.
Or read it, or listen to it. And it's only after you've had a sizable audience that was not shy enough to tell you what they got out of it.
Yeah.
That you get, that's why I'm making this. That's why I'm putting because writing is not that much work. It doesn't feel that way. But presenting, publishing, showcasing your art, and in capitalist system, capitalizing on your art so that you could continue living and producing art, those are the time demons.
Yes. Yes.
Those are the things that take up the most time.
Absolutely right. This is making me think of it took me so long. I mean, and I've engaged in a number of different art forms, and I would say I've been curious about a lot of different mediums, and kind of have spent maybe 2 years at a time doing painting or film or writing or music. And I think without realizing it, through my 20s, I was still paying way too much attention to what people thought, and paying attention to public trends of what was popular, and trying to fit my art into something that would be received well. But I've come to realize, both for myself and all of the artists that I admire, the purest, like Josh, the most me that I can be in what I'm making is what is going to connect with the people who are looking for that, because people recognize humanity, they recognize authenticity, and that it's the whole point is to find the purest version of yourself and present that. And obviously not everyone is going to connect with that, but the people who do, it will mean that much more, because something rings true about that kind of relationship. It will find the right people if you're being the most unique that you can. Yeah.
I mean, and that every story is going to bring something out, so I remember when my first book in print came out, Dearest Void, and I remember this was back then. I also thought that, what, a book is published, you read it. I don't have anything to. I've done my work. That's it. You go read your book. I'm not going to be reading it to you. And it took me actually a while to become a performing poet. Much longer than there was here's my book.
Yeah.
And then years, and I guess I could do that.
Yeah.
But my initial thing was I made the work. That's it. You go read it.
Yes.
That's your job. I did all the steps up to now. And then I've encountered at one point of my life in Phoenix, Arizona, a fellow artist and a coffee shop owner by the name of Jeff Fisher, Lux Coffee Shop in Phoenix, if you're traveling, cool place. And so Jeff told me once when I was exhibiting my visual art there, and he says, are you going to be there to stand behind your art? So I asked him what that means, and he says, well, it's one thing to just put things on the walls, but are you going to be present next to it to talk to people about it, to defend it, to explain it, to be the voice of it?
Yes.
And it dropped in my mind a long time ago that this is one way you do that with poetry. You get up on stage and you give your poetry a voice, legs, body.
Mm-hmm.
And now you're standing behind your art.
Yes.
Now you're really like, that's the story. Talk to me.
Yes.
Talk, tell me what you felt, what you thought. It doesn't mean that I will change the way I do art, but I will be there to be its voice.
Yes. Did you feel nervous about performing early on, or did that feel vulnerable?
That was very weird. So I've had a stretch of time. So as I said, I began in theater, never had stage
that's right.
fright.
Sure.
Like went up, just did a thing, a whole bunch of people watching me. At points of my life, I was leading workshops and, teams of people and doing a lot of public speaking. Never had it. And so I think it was back in, relatively not that long ago, 2017. I decided to perform poetry, and I went on stage to perform it, and I noticed that I'm shaking. I'm like, whoa, that's an interesting thing. That never happened to me.
Yeah.
And so I thought, well, I don't know why that is, but I do know the recipe of how to fix that. You just do it over and over and over and over and over and over and over until one day, after hours of being on stage, you're going to go up and go, I'm cool as a cucumber.
Yeah.
I'm fine.
Mm-hmm.
There's still anxieties. There's still judgments. We don't go away from that, right?
Sure.
I think most of the time on stage, I frankly think I'm bombing, right? Like, all right, this was not great. And then what happens is members of the audience will come up to you and say, hey, this was amazing. So you do the best you can, right?
Yes.
But that anxiety and fear goes away if you lean into it. So step into the fear, go into it.
Yes.
And then, just like Frank Herbert said, you move through the fear. You're on the other side.
Yes. Fear is the mind killer.
Yeah.
So you've described to me one project that is very personal and very lengthy. Is that typically what you draw from and what you write about is your own experience, or do you ever write things that are more abstract or about other subjects, or even some of these, myth stories you grew up on? Yeah, what do you draw from?
Well, I have written hundreds of poems by now, probably close to 1,000, if not more. I've got some novels that are sitting in a back burner waiting until I have, the settled life,
Sure.
where I have my own space and able to wake up and dedicate time to writing. I'm very interested in magical realism as an art form.
Yes.
That allows you to explore a lot of interesting things. But the subject matter, I guess, is life. It's existing, so, I will have some of my poetry is commentary of what I see, feel around me. Some of it is commentary on social and political structures. I would say that because of what my life was, a lot of my poetry is describing to people what it feels like to be an immigrant, describing what it feels like to be poor. I would say some of the poetry that, that's an examination. It's examination of what systems we have created, and here's what they feel like, because poetry is about feeling. And now, is there a solution? If there is a problem, is there a solution? Can we find one? So that's kind of, that has been my subject matter for the last few years, definitely. It's a lot of social commentary, a lot of personal life experience transposed to a greater theme.
Yes.
Like that big project that you were talking about, the Night Since. 363 poems written between January 17th of 2019 and January thereabouts 15th, 17th, I don't remember anymore, of 2020. And that was a project describing emotional landscape of being without a home. Now, as an artist, as an immigrant, I'm used to being without a permanent, settled scenario.
Yes.
You know, I don't have a country, I don't have a people. Hell, I didn't have it back where I come from because I am quarter Ukrainian, quarter Russian, quarter Jew, and quarter Roma.
Wow.
So in Russia, I would be Ukrainian, Ukraine, I would be Russian. God's forbid anybody finds out you're Jew or Roma.
Yes.
Right?
God.
So, you know, it's an interesting thing. It took me 44 years to be much more open about where my roots are, you know, and talk about these complex ideas of nationality and, you know, how made up some of these things are, but how not made up the consequences are.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
You know, I often joke that if Nazis come around again, they wouldn't know what to do with me because they would have to assign me like all the little symbols they had.
Oh my God.
Right? You know, it's like you're getting every little symbol. We were going to have to separate you in parts and put you in different cars.
Oh my God. Yes.
But that's, you know, and that's in itself, knowing that that has been a thing in the past and it might be a thing in the future. Propels me to write.
Yes.
Because if I can describe my internal experience, if I can question the political systems, the social systems, and there might be one person reading it for whom it makes a difference,
Yes.
who either sees themselves in that story, so they feel like their voice is amplified, or they just see something they've never thought about before.
Absolutely.
You know, countless Americans don't understand what it's like to be an immigrant, even though they are all descendants of immigrants.
Sure.
There's, you know, there are Native Americans who are not descendants of immigrants, and then there's this vast mass of folks that came here from somewhere else in generations. But I think they all forget what it's like not to have a home, not to have a belonging.
Yeah.
And when they treat people that come here, and usually you don't come to another country because you were comfortable in your own place.
Right.
And usually if you end up in an empire like United States, you came here because the empire went and messed about where you come from.
Yes.
You know, the reason I'm here is because the United States actively messed with Soviet Union, right? They actively contributed to the downfall of a system that was, for us, was working. You know, it was being reformed. It was, you know, it was a process, right?
Yes.
But the rich and powerful were deciding that that's not good enough for them. They want to exploit resources in other parts of the world. And so people that come from elsewhere, whether they realize it or not, they come to other places to move, not because they were comfortable where they were, but they were uncomfortable, and most likely uncomfortable because of outside influences.
Yes. It's so interesting that this might be hard to answer. I experience you as such a warm and kind and gentle, humble, like open-hearted person. And given your experience, it would be so easy for you to be angry and embittered. And I'm just curious what you attribute that to, your character and your peaceableness. And have there been versions of you in the past that were angry and bitter and different?
I'm still bitter and angry.
Okay. Yes.
It just doesn't serve any purpose. You know, I can express some of my anger and bitterness in my art. But I also know that just being angry and embittered does not solve a problem. You know, to me that there is a maxim, if you're walking around and you see something going on and you say that someone ought to do something about that, if you're the one saying it, that someone is you.
Yeah.
Now, you may not have the resources, you may not have, you know, most of my artistic life has been shaped by that. oh, there's not an open mic where a poet can share 10 minutes of their poetry. We'll make one.
Yeah.
There is not a show that will enable poets to have a byline publication. There isn't. You don't know about one. That means it's not, right there in front of you. Make one.
Yeah.
You feel like they're underrepresented voices in the readings that you go to. Like, say, for example, in United States, a lot of the stages are controlled by academia, right? And so they shut off the voices of people from the street, people that don't have the money to receive the education.
Yes.
That doesn't mean that those people are less smart or their voices are less valuable.
Right.
So if you see that there is not a stage for that, make that stage. So to me, that's the way to transform your anger, your bitterness. I will still go up on stage and I have no problem pointing a finger and placing the blame.
Sure.
But that's emotional release. Feels great. Fantastic. You walk off the stage and go, okay, great, fantastic.
Yeah.
I got my feelings out. But also, what are you going to do to change it? I could be walking around, United States and say, y'all should be speaking Russian. What's wrong with you? Right? Like most Americans are walking around and thinking that English is the only language in the world.
Right. Yes.
So to me, these are the things that you figure out how to do. If you can't do them, if you can't figure out how you could, maybe do that. I mean, like the problems that we run into with like the Word Light show. It would take, to put on a good show and publish an anthology of work, it would take about $5,000 to $6,000, right? Where, we also want to keep the show accessible.
Sure.
So the tickets at the theater, pay what you can, so you can get in. If you have $0, you can still go to the theater and participate in poetry event. So what do you do?
Yeah.
So yeah, you figure out ways. You say, hey, we'll sell the season tickets to folks that have disposable income and support arts. We'll, ask local businesses, small businesses, people that we know in the community that, that have been lucky enough to have an opportunity to have a business and have a little bit more than we do. And we would love to share their message, right? So we'll do sponsorships.
Yes.
We'll raise money other ways. When we have the ability, we'll apply for grants, things like that. But you always look for a solution. I could be mad that we don't get money for tickets, or we don't get money to support the art and produce the best show possible. But that doesn't serve a whole lot of purpose.
Right.
Get through your anger, like with fear, get through it. Use it to motivate you. And then do something.
Yes.
Figure out a solution.
Right.
Try it out. If it doesn't work, move on. Next solution.
Yes.
But keep going forward.
I'm curious about, I love that attitude and that wherewithal, and just like noticing a problem and taking care of it and taking that initiative, which I do think is relatively rare among humans. But I was curious, growing up in an atheist country and then having a fairly transient life of immigrating here and sometimes literally not having a home, sometimes literally being homeless, is your sort of belief about what's going on in this universe and your worldview, is it like self-reliance? Is there any sort of spiritual or mystical component, or what do you feel about that?
Well, so to me, the two things are, there is a private metaphysical search, right? That is a thing that's unique to every individual.
Yeah.
And then there is the physicality of life. And physicality is interdependence. It's not independence. It's always interdependence. Because no matter how individualistic and, rugged individual you are, thing is, you're always going to be using somebody else's knowledge, those that came before you, Doesn't you didn't learn language, you didn't create it, you didn't make it up. So you're already relying on countless generations of humans. You're relying on every little bit of nature around you. If the trees stopped producing oxygen for you, you would die.
Yes.
So there is a myth of independence.
Whoa.
To me, it is if any part of the world surrounding you stops functioning, leaves you alone, you spit. There's a very interesting proverb. If I spit at the world, it'll wipe it off and keep going. If the world spits at me, I'll drown.
Yes.
So to me, there is a very, very much a physical world in which you exist, which maybe because of scarcity of resources and the capitalist system that we live in, that it's very much separate for me from the metaphysical searches.
Wow. Yes.
Because to me, you first take care of the physical things. Put the food in your mouth and other people's mouths. Have a shelter. Do those things. And then most of the spirituality in the world has transformed into organized religion, which is frankly is a sham.
Yes.
And I've seen that, I grew up in an atheist country, so maybe I'm biased, but, I remember the stories that my grandparents were telling me, or great-grandparents and older folks, of the priests wearing gold paraphernalia while their congregation has children dying of hunger.
Yes.
To me, that is, and I see still, a friend of mine in Phoenix invited me to go to a mega church. So I walked in there, and I'm watching this very well-off pastor collecting donations and speaking things like "Army of God," da-da-da-da-da. Yeah. I'm going, oh my God, you are a horrible human being.
Yes.
You literally, you have people in your congregations that are poor, that are on food stamps, that eat really low-quality food, don't have a place to live, and you're taking money from them?
Yeah.
That's wrong.
Yes.
I don't care what kind of God you created. And to me, gods are created.
Yes.
To me, we made them up.
Yes.
Whatever our, the argument that I have for people is like, if there is an infinite type of consciousness, there is no way you can connect to it because you're finite. No matter what you're going to do, you're always going to fall short of understanding it. Because you are finite. You have a finite amount of years you're going to be existing. You may have a portion of that consciousness, and maybe you could have a sense that you might kind of feel what it's like if you do certain kinds of drugs. But I don't think you could fathom what that is. And you can't fathom the reason, right, why things would exist that way if that indeed was the case. There's no proof, right? So for me, I guess I chose my way. I don't really care if gods exist, because to me, the much more important thing is are people around me okay? Am I okay? Am I showing up in the world in the best way possible? And sometimes you're not. Sometimes you're, seven traumas in a trench coat. That's all you are.
Yes.
And you got to be working on them traumas to not be, right? To show up as an actual human being. And that's your job. That's not the job of your community. Right? To alleviate you from trauma and, help you. They can help you. They can show you what it looks like.
Yes.
But that's your job. That's, you show up, you deconstruct it, you go, well, let me do better.
Yes. Well said. If if you were to have your future and all of your desires and dreams as an artist, as a writer, as a human come true, what would that look like? Or is it already happening in a certain sense?
Some of it is happening. I think having resources to produce art other people's art. I've already had my feeling of the first book, of the first thing, of the first performance. I still have some ahead of me, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Bigger stage, bigger name, whatever these things are, but they're not quite as important.
Mm-hmm.
I get my kicks out of seeing a poet hold their first book in their hands.
Yes.
I get my kicks out of a poet coming off stage and going, I didn't know a show could be like that.
Mm.
And helping produce that and make that, because a lot of it is just simple tricks to put it together, to create an experience. To me, that's much more important. And I mean, personally, I would love to be comfortable.
Yeah.
Personally, I would love to live in a little, bit of land on the Oregon coast, looking at the ocean every day. That's where I recharge.
Yes.
I don't get energy from performances. I don't get energy from communication with people. I can do it.
Uh-huh.
I am okay at it, but I rest with specifically ocean and silence and contemplation. Those are the things that, being with my loved ones, being with my partner, cats, love cats. I love some dogs too.
Yeah. That made me think contemplation. What is your writing process look like? Do you write when inspiration strikes, or have you been more regimented, like write every day at a certain time, even if it's crap sometimes? Or has it looked different ways? Okay.
Both.
Yeah.
Both. So, I've hosted writing workshops with people. There's no such thing as writing block. To me, it's basically this. There are things you want to write, and there are things that you have to write. If you're not writing what you have to write, you will never write what you want to write.
Whoa.
That is the thing that stands in between you and what you want to write. So if, say, for example, you're sitting there and you're going like, I want to write a good poem, and it's not coming. Well, maybe what you need to do is listen to yourself. What is it that you have to write? Maybe you're angry at something. Maybe what's standing in the way? Write that first. And so when I was doing Night Since, it was a project where I wrote every night before sleep. That was the only time I could secure knowing that I'm going to be stationary.
Sure.
Like, for most of the day, I would not know where I'm going to sleep.
Wow. Yeah.
But right before sleep, I know that this is the place and time, right? And so I made myself write a piece that, sometimes that day, but definitely by the end of the day. And that is a discipline. I feel like people say that discipline is not a good thing, being harsh to yourself, being demanding. But I think if you understand yourself and if you are gentle with your demands, this is something that propels you forward. So, no, don't kill yourself by doing the things. Don't be picking up weight that's going to give you, an injury.
Right.
But keep doing a little bit, every bit, even if you don't want to.
Yes.
And to me, that was, that I've done that exercise a number of times, and it works. I mean, it's not always going to be great. The entire series, because it's presented unedited, I'll perform some of this poetry and go, phew, that's all right. But it does work in context. It's a story. It's a story of and that's how you showed up that day. Now, in the words of the demon from Good Omens, grow better.
Yes. I like that. Yes. Well, this has been a marvelous conversation. Where would you like to send people, both on the internet and locally in Portland, to find your work and to engage with the publications?
So there are a few places. I am a co-founder of Lightship Press, so lightshippress.com. There you will also find our showcase, lightshippress.com/wordlights. That's coming up on January 24th at Coho Theater. I would love for people to show up there. Myself, I have a Patreon. and a website, so people can support my work and also get access to the archive of all of my poetry there. Patreon.com/Igor Brezhnev. And then my website is igorbrezhnev.com. I have a mailing list, all of the things. If they want to hear my poetry, it's on Bandcamp, and the links are on my website.
Excellent.
Yeah, and continue showing up for art. And there's this town has an incredible pool of talent. You know, I've been here since 2013, and just the kind of interdependence and collaboration and co-creation of the talent in this town is just simply incredible. It's very, very valuable to know that exists, because there's not a lot of places like that.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, I've experienced that too. It's an incredible place to live, and an incredible place to be an artist. And so as we're recording this, we are in the building of Jaja PDX, or also the Haven. They share a space, and you can buy the Lightship Press books right here if you find yourself in Portland or if you live here already. Are the books carried anywhere else around town?
We've got, so the books, the books are carried by Powell's Books.
Oh, excellent. Yeah.
We just dropped them off not too long ago. We also have a wonderful bookstore. If you find yourself on the other side of Columbia River in Vancouver, Birdhouse Books.
Cool.
Just amazing group of people. Lucas and Sarah, the owners, are incredible supporters of local art and poetry and writing. Check that bookstore out. Birdhousebooks.store, I think. But yeah, that's in Vancouver. And then Belmont Books is another good bookstore to find our books at. Rose City Book Pub might have some.
Oh yeah.
From time to time. So the Lightship Press puts we distribute books to Powell's for our authors, and then most authors independently place their book for consignment in local stores. So you might find it in your store. Ask your store.
Cool.
Ask them to if they have a book. And I thought I would be reading a whole lot more poetry. So I think I'll finish off.
Please. Oh, that'd be excellent.
So this is one of my favorite poems from Semrose Preminger. And so Semrose, they were a medic during the protests in 2020. And this entire book, Our Streets, is written from that perspective. And this is a poem called Nightmare Elk. For those who have left us, for those still fighting, what's that bright and rowdy rolling up the street? The neighborhood watches their children declared a riot. The DJ declared a riot. The donut shop declared a riot. The neighborhood watches. Their children, miraculously feral, grow antlers, grow teeth.
Excellent way to finish.
I think poetry is a very powerful thing. And Semrose is going to be reading that and other poems at the showcase coming up this Tuesday. Check them out. They're amazing. And if you want to hear my poetry, you can find it elsewhere.
Yes, yes. Excellent. Thank you, Igor.
Thank you, Josh.
It's
I
a pleasure
appreciate
to
it.
have you. Yes.